The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local journalism today at chly.ca/donate. Local news doesn't survive without local support.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Stories of murders, mining disasters, explosions, and other tragedies from Nanaimo's past have been brought together in a book from lifelong history buff T.W. Paterson. Called Unknown Nanaimo, it focuses on events from the 1850s through to the turn of the 20th century, with much of the material sourced from newspaper accounts of the period. Speaking of newspapers, Paterson himself was the author of a historical column in the Nanaimo Free Press in the 1990s, and he drew upon his work there for this new collection. He visited the CHLY studio to speak about Unknown Nanaimo.
TW is my byline, T for Tom, okay? And I've been writing since I was 14, writing British Columbia factual nonfiction history since I was 17. And so far I've written 38 books, 36 of them on Vancouver, British Columbia history, 2 of them farther afield.
And you got this new book out. It's called Unknown Nanaimo. It's billed as history you never learned in school. I understand that these stories kind of got their birth from columns you used to write in the paper here in the 1990s. Could you tell me about that?
Yes. Back in the 1990s, I was already writing a twice weekly column in the Cowichan paper, Cowichan Chronicles. And I was approached by Peter Godfrey, who had just been brought in by the Nanaimo Free Press as managing editor. Would I write a column on Nanaimo history? And of course, I'd already had an interest in Nanaimo history, and I had begun archiving on that subject. But that put me to work. When I agreed to a weekly column, which ran for 8 years, I had to begin some serious research on Nanaimo history. And that just progressed into what has become my number one passion, the coal mining history of the greater Nanaimo area.
And why has that become your number one passion? What is it about that coal mining history that grips you?
I've actually had to think about that. My maternal grandfather went down into the mines of Durham in the old country at the age of 10. He survived that, fortunately. I probably was drawn to it by the story values, the drama. I mean, when you think about it, the scenes that you can imagine with women and children gathered about a pit head while they're trying to rescue the husbands and the fathers down below, it doesn't really get more dramatic than that. And I'm a storyteller who chooses facts. I work with history, with facts, okay? But I'm a sucker for drama like anybody else.
And that seems to be the approach you've taken in this book. It's about 250 pages, and it's divided up into maybe 1 or 2 page chunks. Each one is a little story of, I shouldn't say little, it's short in terms of being 1 or 2 pages, but a dramatic story, whether it's related to a crime that took place in Nanaimo, whether it's related to an explosion, an accident. Can you tell me what exactly are the stories? What is in the material you've written about?
I've tried to take an informal, I keep in my own mind thinking almost irreverent approach to history. Where I see myself today as a writer is that I am trying to get people to turn on to history. You know, it's so common. You've heard the expression, history is dull, boring. How can it possibly be? It's the story of the human drama. You can't get any more exciting than that. So Nanaimo is almost unique. I don't know of any other community in all of Canada where you walk over abandoned coal mines when you're downtown. That in itself is just sensational. But Nanaimo wasn't purely coal mining, of course. It started out as a Hudson's Bay Company, which was a major fur trading company. When the mines began to develop, it became probably the second busiest seaport north of San Francisco. Ships from around the world called at Departure Bay for the coal, but of course they came with crews of all nationalities, all backgrounds, and so there's all the color and drama of foreign sailors coming to town and obviously enjoying themselves at the saloons. I mean, it was Wild West. I grew up myself on American TV, American comic books. So it sort of branded my approach to history. I like to think I've matured a little bit since then, but you get my drift. Vancouver was exciting. There wasn't hardly a day went by that somebody didn't get beat up, shot, drowned, killed in a mine. It just went on and on and on. And I went into those newspapers, the Nanaimo Free Press of the day. I went through every issue. And I should explain to listeners that I've taken the approach of what today we would call colonial. I do give a large chapter at the beginning to the Nanaimo Nation, the first residents of Nanaimo, obviously. But the book basically is 1852, the discovery of coal, to 1900. I had to have a cutoff because the book would just go on forever. So it's the colonial history's European community, if you want to put it in that way. And simply put, there never was a dull moment. You go into those newspapers and you are just astounded. Every time you turn the page, there's another great story.
You, in the book, you kind of have this sardonic way of saying, the good old days, like the good old days, things aren't like the good old days, but you do that and then you talk about murders that took place in Nanaimo. Could you tell me just about that idea, that contrast of like looking back at history with kind of rosy eyes, but also recognizing that a lot of terrible things happen to people? Well,
it's common for myself, even growing up, was to think that the good old things were better back then. But the more I learned about the old days, I mean, how many people today, I'll put it to you this way. You get up in the morning, you flick the light on, you go down to the washroom, you go into the kitchen, you put the electric kettle on, you get my drift. In the old days, you got up in the morning and you would break the ice in the water pail. You would light the fire. This is after you've taken a walk down to the back 40 or used the bucket in the back room. What we take for granted today, it's very hard for us to look at that period and accept how we would start our day in that manner. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, it sounds romantic, it sounds great, but how many of us today would give up the comforts of our modern day life for that? But at the same time, in those days, making a living was not only difficult, for many people it was dangerous. This is before the forest industry, coal mining and shipping and so forth. But everything that everybody did held a danger, physical danger. You're chopping wood, you could cut yourself, you could kill yourself. None of that is in our sphere today. We're spoiled. There you have it today. And so I try to draw that contrast between the life that we understand today and to what is a day and night difference of the so-called good old days. And Nanaimo, again, just outstanding in story values. I'll give you one example. For coal mining, you need explosives. They used to haul dynamite in 20-gallon jugs in the back of a wagon from Sillaire to the mine. And one day, one of the teamsters, I have to assume he hit a bump. They never found a trace of him. only shreds of the horse and a great big hole in the road.
And you write about with that story how, according to what we have left over from the newspapers, at least it seemed like the takeaway from that incident wasn't maybe we shouldn't haul these explosives like this. It was maybe we should try and smooth out the roads.
You had to accept in those days a much higher level of danger, physical and otherwise. That was a given. You didn't question it. Back to the coal mines on that angle of personal safety. I have been through the records. Now, the Department of Mines published annual reports, and these annual reports are priceless, absolutely priceless, because they go into detail that you would not expect from a government report. And the inspectors would also give their personal viewpoints. And time and again, it comes up where so many of the accidents were avoidable. You go underground, you become, it's like anything else, you become used to the working conditions. And if you get away with cutting corners for several months, you go on cutting corners until one day your luck runs out. And the sad fact is a great many of the coal mining accidents, because they weren't all just like major cataclysmic accidents like the one of the number one mine. Every other day, a man was killed or injured in one of the 50, 60 mines in the area. And so many of them, unfortunately, when all said and done, were authors of their own misfortune. So people lived more dangerously because they accepted that was the normal way of life. Whereas today, of course, that would certainly not be the case.
Now, a number of the stories you tell, our window into them is through the newspapers of the time. And I'm wondering if you can give me your sense of how you feel like newspaper coverage has evolved between the 19th century and maybe the time you were writing in the newspapers in the 1990s, and maybe a third window, what you see today.
Well, I still read newspapers. I still subscribe to newspapers, both online and in hard copies. And I do see major changes. And having read every issue of the Nanaimo Free Press over half a century and that, yes, journalistic styles have changed. I don't know where we would be today, historically, if we did not have those newspapers of the past. Government records, they're to the point, whatever it is, property transfer or death certificate or marriage certificate, but there's no meat on the bone, in other words. It's just hints of what's going on. I find newspapers of the past priceless resources. And yes, they've changed. In those days, editors could get away with murder. I mean, the laws of libel and slander were, shall we say, more liberal in those days. And they exercised that. And it was common for a reporter to describe something not just factually and listing events, but through his own eyes. And there's a value in that just can't come from a more academic kind of source. So I love old newspapers. God, I thrive on them. I subscribe to newspapers.com. And I highly recommend that to anybody, as a matter of fact. Old newspapers are just a treasury of the past that cannot be found anywhere else. Thank God we had newspapers.
At the same time, I'm wondering how, when you talk about the journalistic standards being maybe different from what they are today, how do you evaluate when you're reading something from the 1800s in a newspaper? How do you kind of put on your historian goggles and try and judge like how factually accurate it is?
You try to, well, major communities had more than one newspaper. So I mean, Vancouver had 3 and 4 at a time, and you can match the stories. After a while, I've been doing this since I was a teenager, you develop an instinct. Yes, I do not accept every word at face value. I might print it, but in quotation marks. That doesn't mean to say that I believe it. I'm just passing it on to a reader. But you do your best to evaluate it. You just can't take every word as given. It's that simple. But you work with it to the best of your ability. Sometimes there are other sources that you can check against. I mean, sometimes police files are still existent, or court transcripts in some cases. But the farther back you go, the less that is the case. You go back far enough, and really, there is not archives have private journals and so forth. But again, you would be seeing it through the eyes of a single person if you're reading from a diary, and official records, as I've said earlier, are short and sweet, to the point. They don't give any substance. They just give you highlights.
Midcoast Morning is part of our nonprofit newsroom project, supported by listeners like you. Keep this program on the air by funding it today with a monthly sustaining donation at chly.ca/donate. We've got tote bags and shirts if you need an incentive.
Downtown Nanaimo barber Jacob Corder lost his life after an old shell found on Protection Island exploded on Commercial Street, the Nanaimo Free Press reported back in 1880. That story is one of around 100 tales compiled by author T.W. Paterson in his book Unknown Nanaimo, which focuses on a variety of often tragic events from the 19th century in the city. It draws from a series of historical columns he wrote in the 90s for the Nanaimo Free Press. I spoke with Paterson in the CHLY studio about his efforts to keep the community's past alive. A lot of tragedies in Nanaimo's history, a lot of explosions, notably. Were there any individual stories in this collection that have kind of stuck with you ever since you learned about them?
What, specifically explosions or
anything?
What about the man who was arrested for being drunk? It was the holiday weekend, the Queen's anniversary, what do you call it, Empire Day. And so the police, having their hands full, chained him to a post in a stable next to the Wellington Hotel Saloon and went on about their business. The stable caught fire. Obviously, people start running in, but they can't rescue him because he's chained to the post, and he dies in the fire. That's not the sort of event that one would expect to happen today, would it? History to me is really social history. I talk about mining, but I'm talking about it from the human viewpoint. It's all about people. And my book, it's all about people whose names today mean nothing to anyone unless they do as I've done, go into the old newspapers and that. I was just in Dallas Square this morning, and the little sign talks about the architect, Rattenbury. He doesn't tell you anything of the drama that occurred there. They used to hang people there, but that's not what it tells you on the signage. So it always comes down to individuals and people. And I'm talking about so-called, I'm using quotation marks sort of thing, ordinary people. Those are the real people. Yeah, everybody's maybe seen the name Dunsmuir and, Robert, the senior, and James, the son. But how many people know the names of any of the men who actually worked the mines, who actually gave their lives? Over 600 men died in Nanaimo mining, by the way. We don't know how many died later from work-related illnesses, black lung and what have you, or from injuries they had received on the job. You think about that today. If something like that was going on today, well, it's like an epidemic, isn't it? And today we have work safe, compensation, and all these. People had no benefits. For example, if you were injured on the job and you could no longer work, your wife would take in boarders or laundry. It was up to you people to get by. Time and again, a man would be killed on the job, and his widow would marry another miner, for example. So now we would have an extended family. Then he would be killed on the job. It was, God, almost like a cancer in some cases.
And something you touch on in the book that's almost another level of it is the issues related to folks from China who were working in the mines. An example would be that when there was a mining disaster and a bunch of people lost their lives, the names of the miners from China wouldn't even be listed. There would just be a number associated with them. What do you think is important for people to know about kind of that aspect of the history? You're
absolutely right about the Chinese presence. They were so maligned, treated so terribly. It bothers me when I'm working with the material even today. I just can't believe that we could be so bigoted and callous, but that is the reality of it. There's just no getting around it. Back to your number system. We should explain to listeners. A miner was issued a tag. Picture a loonie with a hole drilled through it and a big number stamped on it. That was his number. And when he went to the lamp house, for example, he would hook one on the pegboard, take away the lamp, which also had the number soldered to it. And when he went to the powder house, he'd draw powder and he'd leave another tag. So the number wasn't dehumanizing you. That's how you were identified on the job. Fair enough? And there was another reason for that. There's an explosion. It takes months to recover your body. What identified you? That little brass tag. Back to the Chinese. If they were mining, they also were issued a number. But they were hired under contract. So who was usually a fellow Chinese person. So that contractor, as we'll call him, he would record their names, and they would have their number. But he had their names, not the colliery. So, for example, the signboard down on Halliburton Road, where it lists the Chinese simply by number. It relied on the contractor to come up with their names, and that wasn't it was an exception. What I'm trying to say is, in many of the reports of the fatalities, the Chinese gentlemen are named. Okay, they aren't just numbers. So it wasn't just a blank policy. And really, the problem was the fact that it was a third party. They weren't hired directly by the colliery. They were hired through a contractor. He did the paperwork, or not the paperwork, according however it turned out. So if there's a fault as to being able to give those men names, it goes to that third party. But the truth is, Chinese were treated not even as second-class citizens. Try third and fourth. They were abused. That's the name of the game.
How do you think Nanaimo is doing and has done historically at remembering its past?
Not very good. Okay, on the anniversary of the second worst coal mining disaster in Canadian history, City Hall lowers the flag to half-mast and posts on the website. Whoopee. I'm sorry, that's just not, in my mind, adequate. What people don't understand is when that mine blew up in 1887 and killed 150 men, there was only a few thousand population. There could not have been a living soul in Nanaimo who didn't lose a family member, a friend, a workmate, or an acquaintance. Think of a small nuclear bomb having that kind of widespread effect. But who knows that today? Lowering the flag and a post on the website, and from time to time, to be fair to the newspaper, they do something. But And yes, we have the exhibit downstairs in the museum, which I happen to really enjoy, as a matter of fact. I have most of the artifacts myself that they show. But my point is that we haven't done a good job of honoring, and that's the word I choose to use, honor our history. And I'm hoping to do that, to go a long way with my newest project, 4 volumes on the history of the coal mining. But I'll be going into depth that has never been done since. And that's because I believe so strongly that we have not done a good job of recognizing, acknowledging, nurturing our history.
Why do you think it's so important to do that? When you talk about honoring the history of Nanaimo, what are you talking about honoring?
It's actually quite simple. I'm the first of 3 generations that did not have to serve in the military. Both my grandfathers were disabled. I lost a great uncle. My father served in the North Atlantic. My uncle served in the Army and Navy in the Second World War. But I didn't have to. I have a debt. Now, not just on that level of military service. The people from the past built this community that you and I and everybody listening take for granted. We take as our right. And it is our right. But we didn't land by parachute. Somebody had to lay the ground for us at great, great personal cost. Shouldn't we at least recognize that? And my whole purpose in life today, as I have come to see it, is like Unknown Nanaimo. These are snippets. This is not in-depth history. It's not meant to be. It's meant to turn you on. I try to write to people who aren't normally historically inclined in a way that I grab their attention, their curiosity. I'm trying to pass the torch. There you have it.
And to that point of trying to pass the torch, in this book you write a lot about the influence you received from historians before you. You mentioned a number of times a historian by the name of John Cass.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little more about him and how he influenced you and how you're maybe trying to pay that forward?
Some people recognize the name John Cass. He was a delight. He worked on the ferries, born in Lanceville, which had coal mining history too, by the way, and just had a natural fascination for local history. And in the 1970s, he had a weekly column in the Nanaimo Free Press, full page of archival photos that he was digging up. And as he became known that he was doing this, of course, people were digging out their family scrapbooks and so forth. He came up with unbelievably great photographs. And he did all this for free. This was just John doing his thing. And I would take him, in later years, I would take him to lunch. And it was like listening to a machine gun. This guy talked, and I couldn't possibly, even if I'd had a tape recorder, I couldn't possibly get a lock on this. And it used to make me so frustrated because in the course of the hour and a half, 2 hours we were together, he would give me one nugget after another, except that I couldn't possibly remember them or record them. And so he took a lot, I'm sorry to say, to the grave with them. But I really respect John Cass for what he did. And he did it all just from the heart.
How do you think you can get someone who lives in Nanaimo bitten by the history bug and interested in all of this and doing something to kind of keep its memory alive?
Well, they could visit the underground exhibit in the museum. That's a real turn-on, particularly for children. I've stood and watched children going through that with their parents, and that really lights a short-term flame, right? If only the parents could nurture that in other ways. But this is precisely what Unknown Nanaimo, my book, is trying to do. Whether I succeed, I don't know. I'm just saying to you, I am writing these in a way that I'm trying to incite interest that people then take farther afield on their own. I mean, obviously, it becomes they have to do the rest themselves. If I can turn you on even for 10 minutes, but then you will go to another book. There are other great books on Nanaimo history, obviously, the Lynn Bowen books on the coal mining and so forth. So I'm not disparaging them as competitors. We're working together. I'm hoping with this book to turn people on and to realize what they have here in this community is simply that until now, they basically are clueless.
And you've written a number of books in your life. Right now, with this latest one, you're going the indie route. I'm wondering if you could just tell me about that and what that's like.
Well, I've been doing indie for a while, and I'm born to be indie, okay? I'm not a team player. So, but I have been there with firms. I turned down the second largest publisher in the province only last year. They wanted me to write a book for them, but it didn't fit the calendar that I have set for myself. Today, it is possible for people. Ever since the digital age, the becoming of the digital age, anybody can publish a book today. The trick then is to market it, and boy, is that a trick. So at the present time, Unknown Nanaimo is only available in window seat books on Wesley Street because the time and energy it takes to market, I'd rather put to writing. And I am so committed to this, the 4-part series that I'm writing on the mines, that I do it from morning to evening. I mean, one can extend oneself so far, but I would never discourage anybody from trying it themselves. And you can become very knowledgeable today. There are books and websites that fully tutorial. But that's the route I choose to go.
Is there anything else you'd like to bring to the conversation today about Nanaimo's history or Unknown Nanaimo?
I would just encourage people to really look around them. And not just my book, but there are, as I said, there are other books available on Nanaimo history. Go to the museum. Visit Protection Island, which, is subdivisions, right? But down on the south end, you have the lighthouse and Lighthouse Park and so forth. The history is right there. The first judicial executions in British Columbia's history were just offshore there. Gallows Point, they call it Gallows Point today. I mean, think about that. Visit Della Square and stop and think that you could be standing where they used to hang people. It's a much smaller square today, and probably was behind the building, sort of thing. But you get my drift. Try to immerse yourself, but read instead of watching normal TV fare. History Channel. There is bookstores. I find books on British Columbia history all the time that I have had no idea that they have been published, but I find them there. And BC Book World, it comes out quarterly, and I'm always on the trail. There's not a day goes by that I do not clip something from a current newspaper or download and print something from the web. My archives is bigger than, well, I shouldn't say that, but probably as big as the one at the city archives in Duncan, because I've been doing it quite a while now.
Well, T.W. Paterson, thank you so much for coming on down to the studio to talk about it today.
I thank you for the opportunity.
T.W. Paterson is the author of Unknown Nanaimo. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and R.B. Frew is our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. You can get in touch with us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.